Imagine, for a moment, a world where the air itself carries secrets. Secrets so dangerous, even whispering them aloud could unravel a man's life. Now picture Henrio County, Virginia, 1851, a place of wealth, prestige, and sprawling tobacco fields that hide more than just soil. Beneath the golden leaves, beneath the pride of Riverside Manor, 23 bodies lie buried, unmarked, forgotten, the shadows of men who thought themselves untouchable. The story begins not with greed, but with a wager. A woman, newly married to Edmund Carmichael, looked across the polished oak table and made a bet she was never meant to utter. A bet she could seduce her husband's younger brother, Clayton, during the wedding night itself. The words were audacious, reckless, but in that household, audacity was currency, and manipulation was a form of art. In that moment, a quiet storm began, one that would set the stage for murder, deception, and a family business built on bodies. Edmund and Clayton Carmichael inherited Riverside Manor under the shadow of debts, failed crops, and social expectation. On the surface, they were Southern gentry, handsome, educated, polite. But behind the walls of the three-story manor, charm became camouflage and hospitality a weapon. Wealthy travelers, merchants, and planters arrived with pockets full of gold and left without a trace. Not a single disappearance had ever tied back to the brothers until the arrival of Margaret Carmichael, whose curiosity was as dangerous as her beauty. The estate itself was a fortress of perception. White columns gleaming under the Virginian sun, 12 rooms meticulously furnished, a library lined with leather-bound volumes, and dense woods that swallowed the cries of the unlucky. Riverside Manor was perfectly positioned. The James River for transport, a main thoroughfare connecting Richmond to Petersburg for passing prey, and neighbors too polite or too distracted by their own ambition to ask questions. But make no mistake, this is not merely a tale of murder for money. This is a story of psychological control. The Carmichaels had learned that fear, misdirection, and social trust could be manipulated with surgical precision. They weren't just killing, they were teaching a lesson to anyone who entered their orbit. Power belongs to those who understand its invisible architecture. Margaret, unwittingly, became the next chapter in this system, a catalyst for a truth that had remained hidden for over a decade. And so, the first step of our descent begins here, not in the act of violence, but in the audacity of words. A bet, a marriage, a secret wager that would ignite a chain reaction of manipulation, betrayal, and death. What you're about to hear is not just history. It is an exposure of a carefully concealed human mechanism, one designed to ensnare, exploit, and destroy. And once you see the threads, you cannot unsee them. The Carmichaels were masters of perception. Every gesture, every word, every smile was calibrated. Edmund, the elder, moved through the world with a soldier's precision, measuring men not by friendship or honor, but by their utility. Clayton, younger and more charismatic, wielded charm like a blade, opening doors and disarming suspicion. Together, they had discovered a terrifying truth. Human trust, once earned, could be weaponized. Their system was meticulous. Travelers arrived at Riverside Manor seeking rest, unaware that the manor's hospitality was the first layer of a trap. The brothers observed. They assessed. They studied habits, weaknesses, and patterns. A misplaced glance, a hesitation, and overconfidence in their own safety, these small fractures became entry points for destruction. Over a decade, the Carmichaels had perfected the art of erasing lives without leaving evidence. And yet, no outsider suspected the truth. How could they? Fear is invisible until it strikes. Margaret stepped into this world blind to its mechanics. Her beauty, wit, and audacity were precisely the qualities that made her a danger to herself, to others, and eventually, to the house she married into. She was no passive observer. Her curiosity was a match thrown into a powder keg. The wager she whispered in jest, or was it malice, activated something ancient in human behavior. The desire to dominate, to control, and to humiliate. Within hours, the Carmichaels' cultivated systems of manipulation shifted focus, responding to her like a machine tuned to a new signal. It was not merely a bet of seduction. It was a test of power. Who could bend the other's will? Who could assert dominance first? In the shadows of the manor, the rules of civility dissolved. The brothers' wealth, their charm, and the social deference of the county became tools to assert total control. Here, seduction was not just personal, it was political, a weapon to expose weakness, to measure loyalty, to punish audacity. Every servant, every guest, every neighbor played a role, knowingly or not. The brothers' psychological architecture relied on invisibility and complicity. Even the sheriff, meant to enforce justice, was corralled into compliance through carefully placed gifts, invitations, and financial nudges. And so, the machinery of murder ran quietly, hidden behind polite greetings and candlelit dinners, the darkness camouflaged in genteel manners and fine wine. By the time Margaret realized the stakes, the house itself seemed to conspire against her. Each door, each corridor, each whisper of wind through the oak trees reminded her that Riverside Manor was alive, and it was feeding on secrets. And in that moment, you, the observer, must understand. The Carmichaels were not merely killers. They were architects of human behavior, designing fear with precision, bending morality into a tool for profit. To survive in this world, one would need more than courage. One would need insight into the machinery itself and the willingness to become a participant in the game. The night of the wager arrived like a storm, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. Candles flickered in the manor's grand hall, casting shadows that danced along the walls like specters of the past. Margaret's words, the audacious promise to seduce Clayton, hung in the air, invisible yet palpable, as if the house itself had absorbed them and was waiting to act. Edmund's eyes, cold and calculating, measured her, his mind already tracing every possible outcome. Clayton, unaware at first of the game being played, moved through the drawing rooms with the easy charm that had disarmed countless neighbors and travelers. But tonight, charm alone would not suffice. In the Carmichaels' world, every interaction was a test, every smile a potential weapon. Margaret's wager had become a trigger, activating the most dangerous instincts the brothers had spent years honing. The psychological stakes were immediate. Margaret was no longer simply a bride. She was a player, a potential disruptor of the order Edmund and Clayton had established. The rules of their household, rules built on fear, silence, and absolute obedience, could be bent, but only at great cost. Every gesture, every glance, became a calculated move. Who controlled desire? Who could bend the other's will first? The answer would determine life, death, and power within the manor. As the night progressed, Margaret maneuvered carefully, aware of the thin line between audacity and annihilation. Each step she took was watched, dissected, catalogued. The brothers had perfected observation as a weapon. Even the faintest hesitation could become leverage. In this environment, intimacy was never safe, trust never guaranteed, and the air itself seemed to conspire with the dark architecture of control that had been laid over Riverside Manor. Then came the first act of irreversible betrayal. A seemingly innocent misstep, a door left open. A whisper overheard set the brothers' mechanisms into motion. Rivers of hidden motives and ancient corruption converged. Guests who had arrived under the guise of polite society became pawns, servants transformed into witnesses, and the estate itself, with its dense forests and unmonitored corridors, became a theater of psychological manipulation. Every shadow could conceal a trap, every candlelight a signal. By midnight, the wager had mutated. It was no longer about seduction. It was about dominance, exposure, and the assertion of ultimate control. Margaret's beauty and cunning were being measured against the dark genius of the Carmichael system, a system perfected over years of unseen murders, social engineering, and the quiet corruption of authority. And the observer, you must understand. What appears as chance, lust, or coincidence is in truth a network of strategy, designed to break the uninitiated and reward those who understand the machinery of power. The house had claimed its first psychological victory that night. And yet, this was only the beginning. Once desire collided with the mechanics of fear, once curiosity met hidden agendas, there was no turning back. Every choice from here would echo, leaving a permanent mark on those who dared enter Riverside Manor. By the early hours of the morning, Riverside Manor had transformed. The manor that once promised comfort and prestige now exuded a suffocating presence, as if the walls themselves had absorbed decades of secrets, corruption, and blood. Margaret, fully awake to the nature of the wager she had set in motion, began to sense the invisible threads tying her fate to the Carmichael's sinister design. She realized, too late, that she was no longer an observer but a participant in a system that had perfected the art of annihilation. The brothers moved with quiet precision. Edmund's icy logic orchestrated the unfolding events, while Clayton's charm became a weapon of subtle intimidation. Every glance, every word, every step in the manor was a calculated piece of a lethal puzzle. They had spent years perfecting the art of invisibility, wealth and social standing masking murder, politeness camouflaging exploitation, and neighbors' ignorance reinforcing their security. Margaret had unwittingly stepped into this web, and the house itself seemed to pulse with anticipation, awaiting the collision of audacity and malevolence. It was here that the first cracks in the facade appeared. Margaret began to notice discrepancies in the estate's history letters hidden in the library, journals that hinted at disappearances, servants whose fear was just shy of speech. The air was thick with unspoken truths, with the residue of victims whose lives had been erased. And as she pieced together these fragments, the wager she had made suddenly took on a terrifying magnitude. Seduction had become the lens through which she could view the mechanics of murder, greed, and psychological domination. The estate's design revealed itself as more than architecture; it was a system of control. Corridors became corridors of observation, windows strategic points for surveillance, rooms instruments in a symphony of manipulation. The brothers' psychological reach extended far beyond their immediate presence. Fear and desire were tools to bend behavior, silence dissent, and ensure compliance. Every visitor, every servant, every neighbor who entered the estate became part of an intricate game that rewarded cunning and punished curiosity. Margaret's audacity had lit the match, and the flames illuminated more than the darkness of the night. They revealed the undercurrents of power, control, and human corruption that had been carefully cultivated for over a decade. She understood that this was not a singular crime, not a momentary lapse of morality. Riverside Manor was an institution of domination, a place where the rules of civilization were subverted by design, and the line between life and death was measured by strategy, not chance. And now, as the house held its breath, Margaret faced the ultimate realization. She could no longer remain innocent. To survive, she would have to understand the system, anticipate the mechanics, and confront truths that had been suppressed beneath the tobacco fields for years. And here, dear viewer, you must pause and reflect. Every human system, no matter how elegant or polite, can hide a machinery of control. Comment below with the phrase, "I see the shadows," twice if you are ready to step fully into this descent, to engage with the hidden forces that shape power, manipulation, and fate itself. By midnight, the house had shifted from a place of refined southern elegance to a theater of silent terror. The wager had taken on a life of its own, no longer merely a game of seduction but a test of survival. Margaret moved carefully, aware that every gesture, every word, every heartbeat could be observed, catalogued, and turned against her. Riverside Manor was no longer a home; it was a predator. Edmund watched her like a general surveying a battlefield. Clayton lingered nearby, smiling, masking calculation beneath charm. The brothers had orchestrated this night with precision honed over a decade of erasing lives. Travelers, servants, even family, no one had escaped their scrutiny. Now Margaret herself had become the subject of their psychological engineering. They had turned desire into leverage, curiosity into a weapon, and ambition into a trap. The first act of violence erupted almost imperceptibly. A whispered accusation, a sudden gesture, a door slammed with intent. Margaret realized, in a heartbeat of clarity, that she had ignited forces far beyond her comprehension. The wager had opened the door to a pattern the brothers had maintained for years: control through fear, manipulation, and ultimately elimination. The night's tension crystallized into lethal certainty. The house demanded payment for transgression, and human life would be the currency. But Margaret was no longer naive. In those long, candlelit corridors, she began to trace the architecture of corruption itself. Every room, every servant, every shadow was part of a meticulously designed system of observation and discipline. The brothers had discovered early that absolute control required absolute awareness. Secrets could be weaponized. Silence could be enforced with subtle threat, charm, or murder. And now, she understood, the wager had transformed into a confrontation with this system itself, a collision of human will against an institution designed to crush it. It was in this moment that the first irreversible action occurred. The line between seduction and death blurred. The wager had become a blueprint for destruction. Desire used to disarm, trust to trap, beauty to betray. Margaret, aware of her peril yet unwilling to submit, became both participant and witness to the chilling efficiency of the Carmichaels' methodology. Every moment was measured, every reaction anticipated. She saw the machinery of power in motion, the way it consumed lives without remorse. And the viewer must understand this. What unfolds here is not mere historical gossip. It is a lesson in the dark calculus of control. Desire can be weaponized, trust can be exploited, and audacity can be fatal. Riverside Manor, with its oak-shaded driveways and gleaming columns, was not a home. It was a system and institution of domination, perfected through years of unseen horrors. And Margaret, by daring to test it, had unlocked its most dangerous potential. The night had reached its apex. Riverside Manor, once a symbol of refinement and southern prestige, had transformed into a crucible of fear, manipulation, and calculated death. The wager, whispered in audacity hours before, had evolved into something monstrous, an instrument of power designed to test the limits of human will. Margaret, fully awake to the stakes, sensed the weight of unseen eyes, the invisible threads that controlled every move she made. Every shadow was a trap, every corridor, a conduit for observation. Edmund, composed as ever, directed the night with the precision of a man who had erased dozens of lives without a trace. His pale blue eyes, cold as river ice, assessed every possibility. Clayton, the charming executioner, moved like a predator in polite clothing, disarming suspicion with effortless grace. Together, the brothers had constructed a lethal machine, one in which fear, desire, and curiosity could be manipulated with surgical precision. And tonight, Margaret was at the center of its mechanisms. The moment of violence came not with chaos, but with deliberate intent. Every gesture, every word, every interaction had been orchestrated to corner, confuse, and control. Margaret realized she was no longer playing a game. She was navigating an architecture of murder designed to anticipate her every reaction. And when the first blow fell, a sudden act, precise, and horrifying, it was the culmination of a decade-long pattern of invisible terror. What followed was a terrifying symphony of strategy and cruelty. The brothers' system, perfected over years, moved with seamless efficiency. No weaknesses, no loose ends. Every action calculated to enforce obedience, silence, and fear. Margaret, in her audacity, had become both the instrument and the witness of this process, learning in a heartbeat what countless victims before her had only discovered too late. Riverside Manor demanded absolute control, and any defiance carried the ultimate price. But amidst the horror, a lesson emerges, a pattern that transcends time. Human institutions, cloaked in civility and prestige, can mask machinery of domination. The Carmichaels were not anomalies. They were architects of invisible power, teaching that manipulation, charm, and perception could be weaponized with devastating effect. They turned desire into leverage, curiosity into a trap, and audacity into a death sentence. And now, for the viewer, the revelation deepens. The true horror of Riverside Manor is not merely the act of murder itself, but the system that made it inevitable. A system designed to exploit, control, and erase with terrifying efficiency. Margaret's survival, her awareness, her audacity, all of it was tested against a machine built to consume human lives. And yet, in bearing witness, we too are drawn into understanding the invisible architecture of fear, greed, and power that can exist in any world, at any time. Morning broke over Henrio County like a pale, indifferent witness, casting light on a manor that had witnessed horrors few could imagine. Riverside Manor stood serene, its white columns gleaming in the early sun, concealing the rot beneath the carefully buried secrets, the blood-soaked earth, and the invisible chains of control that had dictated every action of the night before. Margaret, now fully awake to the depth of the house's darkness, realized that the wager had been more than a test of desire, it had been a doorway into the mechanics of human corruption. The brothers moved with the same cold efficiency they had honed for over a decade. Edmund ensured that appearances remained flawless. Clayton maintained charm, deflecting suspicion and reinforcing social trust. Outsiders, neighbors, merchants, visiting planters remained oblivious to the machinery of murder operating just beyond polite conversation. Their world, bound by civility, status, and assumption, allowed the Carmichaels to continue unchecked, every disappearance cloaked by social norms and distraction. It was here that the true scale of Riverside Manor's corruption became apparent. Documents hidden in the library hinted at prior wives, travelers, and acquaintances who had vanished with remarkable regularity. Servants who had lived under fear's constant shadow could only speak in fragments, their voices tremulous, their eyes avoiding any direct confrontation. Margaret began to understand that the estate was not just a home, but a system and institution built to manipulate, exploit, and, when necessary, eliminate anyone who threatened the equilibrium of power. The ritual of murder, so carefully codified, revealed a terrifying insight. Human behavior could be measured, anticipated, and controlled with precision. Fear was an instrument. Desire was leverage. Trust was a currency to be spent, manipulated, and drained. And in this system, Margaret recognized her own role not as a victim alone, but as a participant, navigating a lethal hierarchy designed to bend wills and consume lives. Yet, even amidst horror, there was clarity. Observing the mechanics of the Carmichaels' control, she saw patterns invisible to ordinary men. The interplay of authority, social expectation, and psychological dominance. Every act of manipulation, every calculated gesture, every carefully staged interaction revealed a timeless truth. Power thrives in secrecy, and human nature can be engineered to bend to it. And now, to the viewer, the Carmichaels' reign did not end with the night's bloodshed. It extended across time and space, across perception and belief. Every society, every system, carries the potential for invisible dominion. Comment again with the phrase, "I see the shadows," twice if you are ready to confront the hidden forces that shape human behavior, morality, and the unseen architecture of control. In understanding these mechanisms, you step closer to mastery over yourself and the world you inhabit. Years passed, but the echoes of Riverside Manor never faded. The tobacco fields remained golden in the sun, the white columns gleamed in the day, and the oak trees cast shadows that stretched across the circular driveways, but beneath it all, the truth remained buried, as carefully concealed as the bodies themselves. Margaret had survived, but survival in this house was no victory. It was a transaction with darkness, a permanent awareness of the machinery that governed human behavior, and a recognition that some wagers carry consequences beyond reckoning. The Carmichaels continued their reign for years, perfecting the art of concealment, wielding fear, manipulation, and social trust like instruments of domination. The system they created built on observation, psychological insight, and a ruthless exploitation of human desire remains a lesson for anyone who studies the mechanics of power. They demonstrated that institutions, appearances, and even the law can be bent, corrupted, and weaponized by those who understand their architecture. Margaret, in her survival, became a silent witness to the truth most would never see. She understood the interplay of audacity, desire, and deadly consequence, and the subtle ways a single action, a bet, a word, a glance could trigger a chain reaction beyond imagination. Riverside Manor was not simply a place of murder. It was a mirror reflecting the timeless potential for ambition to corrupt, for trust to be weaponized, and for human systems to mask unimaginable cruelty. And here lies the final revelation for you, the observer. The danger is not only in the Carmichaels themselves, but in the systems they exploited, the politeness of neighbors, the distraction of politics, the assumptions of wealth and civility. Anywhere power is unexamined, control can be seized. Anywhere trust is blind, manipulation waits. And the deeper you look, the more you realize that the forces at play in 1851 Henrio County exist still in boardrooms, in politics, in the subtle orchestration of human behavior every day. The story of Riverside Manor is more than a tale of murder, it is a lesson, an awakening. It teaches that power is invisible until it is exercised, that corruption often hides beneath beauty and refinement, and that human will can be bent when the architecture of control is understood and applied. For those who dare to see it, it offers insight into fear, desire, and domination, the tools used by the few to command the many. So remember, when you consider the wagers you make, the games you play, and the systems you trust, the shadows are always watching. To truly step into mastery, to recognize manipulation and wield it with awareness, you must confront these truths. And once you have seen, once you have understood, there is no turning back. Riverside Manor is not just history, it is a reflection of the forces that shape every world, every life, and every choice we make. You've witnessed the wager, the manipulation, the darkness of Riverside Manor. Now, tell me, do you see the shadows? Comment, I see the shadows twice if you dare to confront the hidden forces that shape power, desire, and fear. Share this story with someone ready to see beyond the veil. Step carefully, knowledge like this changes a man forever.